Everybody, hope you had a great holiday. I'm here back with some screenwriting tips, kind of. They're not really screenwriting tips per se, but I wanted to expand a little bit what I talked about in my previous video about the life of Brian, this idea of politics in movies. And I just wanted to talk about it because I like talking politics and I love talking movies, so naturally. What is the problem with politics in movies? Well, it seems to me that the problem now is that politics in reality have become so one-sided that we cannot get a good mix of the other side right now. Let me try to explain what I mean. So, movies in the 40s, 50s, and 60s, early 60s, they were very conservative because the dominating politics at the time were conservative. And despite the fact that Hollywood was kind of liberal back then, not really as liberal as it is now politically, it was always a struggle to sort of bring those more progressive ideas to the forefront because of the conservative vibe that the general culture and society had. Now it's kind of flipped on its head, and the dominating political landscape, if you will, is progressivism. And that domination, just as conservatism dominating went too far in some aspects, progressivism has gone too far in some aspects, and it feels probably worse than it is. But what we have now is a situation where, like, for instance, the movie Vice just came out, which I'm sure is an excellent movie. It looks awesome. It's all about Dick Cheney and George Bush. But, you know, we don't need a movie about Dick Cheney and George Bush and how bad they were. I mean, I think we're all kind of on the same page that the Bush administration was an awful, awful presidential administration, and Dick Cheney is just like one rung short of Satan himself. I mean, yeah, maybe there's some people out there watching this video going, "Oh, Dick Cheney wasn't that bad. You're exaggerating." No, Dick Cheney was pretty bad. I think a lot of people would agree with that. I mean, he had one of the lowest ratings of approval as a vice president. He was not popular at all, and the mere fact that he did run for president after George Bush won 2 terms gives you an indication that, yeah, I mean, he knew he wasn't going to win. People hated him. So, you know, and I'm not saying that he should, Adam McKay shouldn't do a movie about Dick Cheney, but it's not very gutsy right now. It's not a gutsy move to do a Hollywood movie about Dick Cheney because everybody in Hollywood hates Dick Cheney. That much I do know. Just about everybody in Hollywood hates Dick Cheney. So, it's just yet another movie. Michael Moore already covered it with Fahrenheit 9/11. Which I thought was a good movie, and that to me was a gutsier movie because it was sort of an in-the-moment documentary that was happening at a time when Bush was still in office, and it wasn't as gutsy as, say, Stephen Colbert's takedown of the president at the White House press club dinner. That was amazing. Google it if you haven't seen it. It's incredible. But it's gotten so bad now, and the principles behind progressivism kind of disappeared during the reign of Barack Obama. Here we have our first black president, a guy who's seemingly very progressive, and yet wasn't very progressive at all in his policies, really. A guy who kept the United States at war 8 straight years. More than any other president, including Bush, in history. 8 straight years of war. That's pretty warlike. And he won the Nobel Peace Prize. And no one calls him out on that. So, to me, a gutsy Hollywood movie would be a movie criticizing Obama. But I think because of the politics in Hollywood, which are very progressive and liberal, you're not going to see that movie. Ever. Because the politics of the town just wouldn't allow it. They wouldn't finance the movie. The people wouldn't star in it. There'd be all sorts of, the script would leak or scenes would leak and people would be up in arms. Oh my God, you're criticizing Barack Obama, the first black president? What are you, racist? I think that's the general vibe as it is now. I think history will look back very unkindly on not only the Bush administration, but the Obama administration, which was really just a continuation of the bad Bush administration in many, many ways. Now, I'm not saying it was a total disaster. At least Barack Obama, when he gave a speech, he didn't sound like an idiot like Bush did. Bush was embarrassing just to watch. Barack Obama, at least, man, that guy looks like a president, that's for sure. Guy was classy as hell. But, and hey, he opened up trade with Cuba, and that was a good thing. He didn't bomb Syria. That was a good thing. But now, we got Trump in power, and I know people in Hollywood must be biting at the bit to do a movie about him. They haven't done it yet, because it's still too soon, but I'm sure they're just, they can't wait until he's out of office and do the Trump movie about what a monster he was and how terrible. They probably got a movie in development right now based on Bob Woodward's book, Fear. So what am I saying about all this in screenwriting? Well, it's the politics that you have to examine as a writer from the outside. Like, you can't be beholden to your own politics when you're writing. You have to be outside to look at the big picture. And I don't think Hollywood right now is doing a lot of exciting things politically with their work. And they should be. It's not a risk to criticize Donald Trump. Not that he doesn't deserve criticism. He certainly does. But if you just spend all day on your moral high horse criticizing Trump like you're the greatest person in the world, you're not totally doing your job, because there are other people in Washington who aren't Donald Trump who are also not doing their job. And when Donald Trump does do something right, it's time to take the risk and praise him. And that's something you're not going to see in movies or media in general, because most of the politics is for, I shouldn't even say it's left, it's just Democrat. It's just that's the safe area for everybody to be in. I argue often with people that I know who, I'm a libertarian. So in a lot of ways, I don't have a horse in the Democrat-Republican race. When Barack Obama was in, I was a right-wing lunatic. Now that Trump's in, I'm kind of a commie peacenik. I get it from both sides. So in that respect, I can stand outside of the political situation a little bit more than most people and say, this is what's good and this is what's bad. That's just me. Now, I'm not a genius. It's just, I don't have a partisan stake in Republicans or Democrats anymore. I used to be a Democrat. I really was never a Republican, but libertarians are associated with Republicans. So I wouldn't call myself close to a Republican. I'm more of a classical liberal, which is what the Democrats kind of used to model their party at. And a lot of reason I'm making this video is because, it confounds me that even when I argue with fellow libertarians online, that they just don't see this switchover in the partisan Democrat Party that they are now embracing war, and they need to be criticized for that. They need to be criticized, not just because war is bad, and it is, it's terrible, it's doing all sorts of terrible things to the world. They need to be criticized so they can be a better party. Part of the reason Barack Obama was, in my view, not a good president was because he wasn't criticized enough. He wasn't criticized by his own party. There was one guy, Dennis Kucinich. He was there criticizing the Democrats, and then he was gerrymandered right out of his own seat, which was terrible because he was a guy who should have stayed in. He was a guy they needed so they could see where the limit was. See, the Democrats can't see where the limit is anymore. The Republicans, in some respects, and you got to believe in the theory of evolution, not just in animals and plants, but in everything, right? So in the world of the Republicans are scrutinized and attacked pretty regularly, except on Fox News, of course, pretty regularly on regular media all the time. And because of that, most of the Republicans are very ready, and they know where they're going to get hit. So they're ready to defend those positions, or they get kicked out of their seats and they're gone. The lunatics go. Whereas on the Democratic side of things, I think because they have such a great relationship with the media in general, because the media in general is progressive and wants to promote democratic values, and there's nothing wrong with that, they don't get criticized as much, and it's made them over the decades very, very sloppy. And there's a lot of Democrats, they just don't see now how out of touch they are. They weren't out of touch years ago. They're very out of touch now, I think, a lot of them. They look at the economy and even screwing their own guy, Bernie Sanders. Look, I wasn't a fan of Bernie Sanders, but I think, if he had run against Trump, he probably would have beat him. And while I wouldn't have voted for Sanders personally, he was also a bit of an anti-war guy. Not totally anti-war. He was certainly less hawkish than the other Democrats. Now the other Democrats, because, Trump seems to be less hawkish, they're doubling down on this hawkishness. And from a screenwriting perspective, from a movie perspective, how do you address this if the entire Hollywood system is nothing but Democrats? And anyone who expresses any kind of different views, well, we can't have you around because, well, that's not going to look very good to our movie audience. A recent example is Chris Pratt, big-time movie star. My understanding is he was at Disney and he read a Bible quote during a Christmas thing or something. It's like people got bent out of shape. Oh my God, he's a wacko. He's a religious wacko, a conservative. Look, people can read a Bible quote. It doesn't mean they're a monster. Just because they have some beliefs, it depends on how they apply those beliefs. There are plenty of religious people around. I had a friend, he was an artist, one of the comic book guys that I worked with. He was a very religious guy, I found out. I didn't even know he was religious. He wasn't one of these guys who was constantly pushing his religion on me or anyone else. I never saw him talk about religion. And then one day we were just having a conversation. It turns out he was a religious guy. He went to church groups. He did charity work. And I thought, wow, that's really nice. That's really nice. He told me about some of the charity work he did. And I thought, wow, that's really great. That's a good person. And a good person can be religious. Now, obviously you can take that too far, and many people have. And I'm not suggesting, you if you don't have religion, you're a bad person. I don't have religion. I'm not a religious guy at all. But I like to live and let live. I mean, I have a code. I try to keep a moral compass. So, if there's no moral compass other than our side has to win in the world of Democrats, I think, movies related to politics or religion are going to be very bad for a very long time, because it's going to be just like the reverse of what happened during the conservative era. That those progressive values are going to have, the progressive values had to sneak in the movies. They had to hide in metaphors in order to get those messages across. That's what's going to happen now. You're going to have seemingly very progressive movies with conservative values creeping in, because it's those values that keep the balance to some degree. Yes, it's great to have a progressive group of people who, do outrageous and cool things and try different things and accept all people, but there's something to be said for conscientious people who are conservative, who get things done without hurting anybody, but hold themselves to a slightly, higher standard than just doing whatever random thing hits their fancy and gets the work done. So, just like there's always room in this world for progressive ideas, there's also room in this world for a few conservative ones too. That's what we libertarians strive for. We strive for this sort of balance. We, as Gary Johnson said, fiscally conservative and culturally liberal. We'd like for people to be able to smoke pot legally and take whatever drugs they want, but we'd also like people to be able to have their guns and protect their homes. I mean, you may not agree with that, and that's fine. We agree in freedom of speech. We don't want people to be hateful or terrible to other people or hurt them, but we want people to be able to speak their mind, even if their mind is, there's a price to be paid for these freedoms. You can't have a perfect world and have freedoms. Well, quite frankly, you can't have a perfect world, but, there's a price to be paid for the freedoms we have. And that means you're going to have to tolerate a little bit of bullshit. Now, hopefully, if people work together and, there's money around and people have jobs, we could all work together and make the world a nice place. So why couldn't there be a movie criticizing Barack Obama? Barack Obama's out of office. It's not going to hurt him. And there might be some perfect valid criticisms that someone growing up now who will become a progressive president can take away from that movie and make better policy because of it. That's what movies do. That's what all art does. It inspires people to be better. But if you're not inspiring people to be better, if you're covering for people, if you're making a partisan movie, or you're pull your punches because you're afraid to tell the truth, you're not inspiring anyone. So, is Vice really an inspiring movie? I don't know. I'll have to see it, but I'm not super inspired to go see it. I'll probably see it eventually. I mean, it looks good, but so did The Big Short, and I still haven't seen that yet. I mean, if somebody was going to make a movie about Barack Obama and really criticize him, well, I'd be like, sign me up. And that's not because I have criticisms of Barack Obama. It's because I haven't seen anything critical of him in the news, except on Fox or on YouTube. That's not the kind of thing I'm talking about. I'm talking about in art. I'm talking about, saying things that need to be said that maybe people don't want to hear. And when you're writing a screenplay or you're getting political, that's what needs to be said. Okay? So in The Life of Brian, when we were talking about the leftist Marxists who wanted to start a revolution in The Life of Brian, the Pythons were criticizing them. And they had a right to criticize them. And they needed to be criticized because many of them were delusional. They weren't going to stop the Roman Empire in that movie, just like modern Marxists weren't going to suddenly overthrow the West for the Soviet Union. Wasn't going to happen. Wasn't going to happen in 1979. We pretty much had won the Cold War by that point. I mean, it wasn't official, but we had buried the Soviets in our money. They couldn't keep up. communism doesn't work. That doesn't mean certain things on the left side of politics can't work, but we can't have a real discussion if it's just going to be one-sided. And since Hollywood and the media are the mouthpiece for the culture in the United States anyway, we need different voices to mix things up, to challenge the people in power, no matter who they are. Doesn't matter who they are. The people in power need to be challenged, not just for the people not out of power, but for the very people who are in power. It makes them better people. If you get your ideas challenged in a serious way, if you have a political discussion and you're really open to it, you become better. You can think like, oh yeah, maybe I didn't think of that. Maybe you're kind of right here and there. I mean, for me personally, it's taken me a long time to reach this libertarian ideology and understand it and embrace it. I wasn't always a libertarian. I was a Democrat, and then I was nothing. Then I was like, I'm an independent. I can't be with these Democrats anymore. They just seem to do the same thing over and over again. I need a change. So when you're writing anything, be it a screenplay or a novel, you have to write the truth, even if that truth is bad. And if you're writing politics in Hollywood, unfortunately, because of the way Hollywood is, right now, you're gonna have to either make your own movie, finance your own movie, or come up with a way to write your politics if it's not, totally congruent with the current regime. You got to figure out a way to sort of get your politics in there without openly stating it. A lot of people point to the movie High Noon, the classic movie High Noon, as a great sort of movie about McCarthyism and one man standing up against people. And I've been watching a lot of interesting videos about McCarthyism of that era, and how it wasn't totally, a show. McCarthy was concerned about people in Washington, not in Hollywood. And the House of Un-American Activities that went after people in Hollywood was actually run by a Democrat, not McCarthy. McCarthy held hearings in the Senate about people in Washington, a different group in the House, because remember, McCarthy was a senator. He was in the Senate. He wasn't on the House committee. The House committee was run by a Democrat, and he went after people in Hollywood. And there were communists in Hollywood. Not that that necessarily justifies their attacks on them. They certainly should have been free to be communists. That's a free system. You're free to be whatever you want, even if you want to believe in a backward ideology like communism. Knock yourself out. But these days it's not communism that's the problem. It's I don't know what you would call it. I mean, a lot of guys online call it regressivism. A progressivism that has turned into regressivism, or regressive progressives. I guess I could agree with that terminology. That seems to make sense. It's like these Twitter mobs and all these. It's really a tiny group of people who are pushing this agenda. I think a lot of them feel attacked. I think a lot of them don't understand that a lot of the big progressive battles have been won. Civil rights, gay marriage, that's all been won. That doesn't mean there's not problems in the world, or racism or discrimination. There's still that around, but it's not as nearly as dire as it was. I mean, I'm not that old, but I'm old enough to remember the 70s and there's some real racists living in the 70s. I mean, these guys dropped the N-bomb, no problem. And they did not like black people. Oh, gay people? Oh my God, forget it. So, we've come a long way. And we have to kind of acknowledge that. Not that there's not some other problems, but we have to keep it all in context. The struggle of transgender people is real. My good friend is a transgender woman. It was a real struggle for her. But that's not the same necessarily as a gay man in the 70s. That was a bigger struggle. That was a different time. And that has nothing compared to a black man in the 50s. That was an even bigger struggle. And if you were a gay black man, oh my God. You know, so we have to keep things in proportion here. People aren't dying in the streets. People aren't being killed by words. There's still problems here. We can work them out. But yelling at each other is not the way. Truth is the way. And that should be in your writing and your screenplays whenever possible. Truth. Even though you're writing fiction, write true. Sorry, I got very ranty. I hope it made sense to you. My name is Tony D. This has been I call it a Screenwriter's Rant, and I hope you tune in next time. Happy New Year if I don't see you before then.